introduce myself. My name is Eric Cosman. Some of you may know me, some of you don't. I am a contributing consultant to ARC and part of the cybersecurity program, cybersecurity team with Sid and Larry and Mark and Alex that you saw this morning. My background, again, I've been around a long time, so I know many of you. I worked in the chemical industry for many years, and I retired back almost 6 years ago now, 5.5 years, no, sorry, 2014, 7.5 years ago, almost 8 years ago. And since then, I've been doing some consulting work and a lot of volunteer pro bono work through ISA. So in the International Society of Automation, I co-chair the ISA 99 Committee on Cybersecurity, and I am the one of the past vice presidents of standards and practices and past president of ISA. I was served as president of ISA in 2020. So as I said, I've been around for a long time. I try hard not to let that reflect in my comments, because when you're as old as dirt like I am, it's hard to avoid the, oh God, been there, done that kind of response. But I'll do my best. I only have a few comments because I want to leave most of our presentation time to our two speakers and then leave ample time the second half of the session for our full panel. So we have two speakers and I think 3 panelists. So let me just get started. Our topic here is ransomware and supply chain, and I'll apologize up front that most of my remarks are going to be more on the ransomware side. I'm going to rely on Mike and some of the other speakers and panelists to touch more on the supply chain aspect of this, but the two of them are clearly related. As Mike pointed out earlier, sort of ransomware is the vehicle, supply chain. Well, ransomware is the tool, and supply chain is the channel that needs to be protected. I just did some research, a little bit of research preparing this slide deck, and found a lot of the question I had in my mind, probably through my own naivete and lack of awareness, because now that I'm not an asset owner anymore, my information is maybe a little more theoretical than practical. The question I had in my mind was, well, ransomware, is that more of a business thing than an OT thing? And so I did some searching around, operations technology and ransomware, and found quite a bit, actually far more than I could put on a slide or two, of examples of where those two subjects intersect. So the question, and I know I've talked to some people in the operations side who have posed the question, a rhetorical question, that, is ransomware something we have to think about? Would people actually attack us in the operations side and hold us for ransom? And I think Clint made a good point in the session this morning when he said, it's like the famous bank robber, and I can't remember his name because I always misquote it to somebody else. But when they asked, I think was it Willie Sutton? Anyway, they asked him one time, they said, well, why do you rob banks? And he said, because that's where the money is. And ransomware attackers are no different. They'll go wherever they can elicit the sort of the most enthusiastic, panicked response and get an immediate response that somebody will actually pay their ransom and not try to work around it or negotiate their way around it. So as you can see here, the slide just gives you some examples. It's not just business information. It definitely, lest you be under the impression that it's something that an operations person doesn't necessarily have to worry about, then hopefully this will correct that impression. So just by a quick show of hands, how many people here are primarily, if not exclusively, responsible for OT or operations systems security? All right, a few, okay, good. And I was a little concerned when we planned this session that we are scheduled up against the ARC's Digital Transformation Council, which is a group that ARC has formed in recent years of asset owners or end users. And I was a little concerned that we wouldn't get any asset owners here because they'd all be at the DTC meeting. But it looks like we have a few. And I won't be so bold as to say that's because it's my session that you're doing that. I would give the credit to the excellent sessions that preceded us this morning. I sat through both of them, and I was just really pleased with the interaction and the discussion and the points that were made, and I hope you were as well. It gave you things to think about. And as a matter of fact, as an ARC consultant, I also do some research for ARC. I've already got 2 of my future research papers lined up based on things that were discussed in the sessions this morning. So I'm going to be busily starting this week working on my mind maps and laying out the content of those. So if you're ARC clients, then you'll see those come out as part of the advisory service. So these are, again, just some examples, and I just grabbed this off the web. So I don't even think I put an attribution in here, but these, again, are just illustrative examples of situations that where, you know, ransomware and operations came together. Unfortunately, I'm not a what's the right word? A field operative like Clint is, so I can't give you the real world examples, which even if I could, I probably wouldn't do it anyway. But this gives you some anonymized information of where ransomware and operations have sort of come together. And you can see through here, it's a pretty wide variety. Transportation, for example, oil and gas, as Clint pointed out to us this morning, is actually also transportation as part of the critical infrastructure classification. Integrators, system integrators, and you can read down the list. I smiled internally, I guess, inside when Clint was talking about the critical infrastructure sectors, because I was involved in the chemical sector cybersecurity program when those were originally defined back around the 2002 timeframe, just about the time that the Department of Homeland Security was coming into existence. And you know, the one that I don't see on the list anymore is national monuments. There used to be a critical infrastructure called national monuments, and I think from a cybersecurity perspective, people have kind of gotten comfortable with the fact that nobody's going to be cyber attacking Mount Rushmore. So maybe that's not as much of importance anymore. So the message here is consider the context. So ransomware is of concern to the financial sector. We know that. It's of concern to anybody that's got sensitive information. A lot of the cases we've seen, for example, have been in the healthcare sector because of the vast amount of personally identifiable information. And I did some work with the healthcare sector a few years ago, adapting interestingly enough, the 62443 standards to medical systems and healthcare. Unfortunately, it never came to full fruition because the people that were paying for it ran out of money, which is kind of unfortunate. But it was a very intriguing exercise that I went through with the people to take standards and practices developed for industrial control systems and translate them and interpret them into the healthcare context. And a lot of it, as we got into it, we realized the concepts were the same. It's just the terminology that's different. So you're talking about equipment under control means nothing to a healthcare practitioner. But if you're talking about, you know, laboratory equipment or the equipment in a coronary ICU or something like that, that's basically what it is. So the concepts translate very well. So the point I'm making is operations, the concept of operations translates very, very well to all kinds of sectors. And speaking to you now as the co-chair of the ISA 99 committee, one of the things that we are figuring out how to do is how to drop the word industrial from those standards, because that word has become a bit of a barrier for people. People say, well, we're not industry, but the concepts all apply. So keep a lookout for that. I stole some of Sid's slides here just to reiterate his points from this morning, and I'm not going to reiterate all of his points because he did it so well and lucidly this morning. But you've seen this ARC maturity model, and talks, basically talking about how to gauge your response depending on, as a function of protection and maturity. The maturity concept is a real interesting one. We are struggling with this, not struggling, we are coming to grips with this right now in the 99 committee that I co-chair, the intersection of maturity and security level, and as a function of the protection or the risk, which is really what you're talking about. And it's turned into a very fascinating concept. Some of you, anyone here, who here is familiar with 6443? Great, that's wonderful. Thank you. Like I said, I co-chair the committee and I'm one of the founding members of the committee, so that's really gratifying. So just, you heard it here first, or maybe not first. The committee is, if you know 62443, you know that security level was originally expressed in terms of perceived capabilities of the adversary. And we are gradually switching that to a more risk-based scale, which is where it really should have been in the first place, in my opinion. So you'll see some of those concepts slowly change with subsequent additions of the standard. So anyway, this is the ARC model. We have a slightly different take on maturity and the standards, but the idea here is the real concept behind maturity is, and this applies to ransomware protection as well, any kind of cybersecurity response, is that you don't get from 0 to fully baked in one step. People can get very discouraged sometimes that they can't realize their aspirations all at once. And I think we're past that now as an industry and as a profession, where people say, oh, this is a project, go fix it. And it's not that simple. You saw this also this morning, another slide. I shamelessly steal slides, so you'll see this one as well. The nature of the adversary. And as Clint, I think, very succinctly put this morning, if you are a target of a sophisticated attacker, God help us if you're the target of a nation state attacker, there's really no way to prevent that. You can try to mitigate the results, but if you're a target, then get ready. And interestingly enough, the way people have turned that around is, and I think this applies to ransomware as well, people have said to me over the years, well, nobody would ever target me, and I'll use a real world example without identifying the company. No one would identify me or target me because, I'm just a paper mill in backwoods Alabama, right? And the answer was, my response to them was, yeah, but you have equipment that's the same as everybody else's. So maybe you're not the target, but you could easily be collateral damage. And I think some ransomware goes out there targeted specifically, but I would expect that a lot of it also goes out there sort of less specifically targeted, looking for soft targets. So the point is, understand the threat, but it's never 0. So just, make sure that you understand that. Again, a Sid slide. See Sid? I don't know where Sid went, but there he is. Sid's beaming over there because I'm using his slides. I won't go into this. He did such a great job of it this morning, but basically we know this. Any of us that have been in this business for a while knows that, the days of isolated systems are gone. This is one of those examples. As being older than dirt, I can remember when systems were really isolated. Not only isolated, but incredibly arcane. So, it's like, who's going to attack this? Hell, we can't even understand it. How could anybody else understand it? And I stand before you as a proud alumnus, I should say, of the Dow Chemical Company, where we built our own control systems and relied on. They're so obscure that nobody else could ever understand them. That's no longer the case. So just a couple of questions or a couple of points here. Why are we seeing more of this convergence, or visibility maybe is a better word, the profile changing on ransomware in operations? Obviously, the growing attack surface. The more these systems become interconnected and exposed, read IIoT and other developments like that, then they are exposed. So the attack surface is there. Some of the examples that were used this morning, I mean, just blew me away. The fish tank example, for example, just as one example. Whoever thought you'd be attacked through a thermometer or a aquarium monitor? The rising payouts, getting back to that comment about we rob banks because that's where the money is. These attackers aren't stupid. They know that, if they're going to, they want to go after a high visibility, high impact target, I'll use a topical example, hypothetical but topical example. Take a baby food manufacturer offline that makes 40% of the baby formula for the United States. Now, fortunately, that's not why it was taken offline, but just, that's an example. We've seen this for a long time in industries like pharmaceuticals, for example, where, the quality, product quality is so critical that any compromise draws into question the quality of the product and the trustworthiness of the product. It's really a cybersecurity equivalent of the Tylenol scare some decades back. High potential for destruction. I think we tend to downplay that one. I worked with a colleague for several years in the chemical sector, and he had a bad habit of using the expression that if we get compromised, we're in the crater making business. And I used to say to him, Mark, don't say that. The last thing we want is to leave the impression in the minds of government people and so forth that we could be in the crater making business. We hopefully are past that point. But while it's true that in the chemical industry, some of those processes are actually controlled explosions, but you want to leave the impression in people's mind that you got a handle on that. And then abundant vulnerabilities. We all know about the legacy, the vulnerability legacy conundrum. And so these are just some reasons. OT is just another variation on a cyber attack. It's the end is a little bit different, but the desired outcome is a little bit different. But it's just another version of any kind of a cyber attack by an adversary. So I have some questions because I said I was going to keep this brief. I'm just to moderate here, but just to open us up, I have some questions for you to ponder on as the two speakers come up and then we sit down as a panel. Is ransomware, in your context, just a business concern? I think one of our panelists actually, in preparing for this event, in their email said, well, we feel we've got the whole IT-OT segregation in pretty good shape, and we don't worry too much about ransomware at the operations level. Not that they don't worry at all, but we think we're pretty well protected. Is there data that, if lost, would compromise your operations? And when I say lost, I mean unavailable. So do you have data in your operations? It could be recipe formulations. If you're in a batch process that changes recipes frequently, and product specifications and that sort of thing, and all of a sudden you didn't have access to those anymore. We're well past the days of what we used to call pots and pans in the process industries, pots and pans chemistry, where it was literally a literal recipe. Throw in a shake of this and a spoon of that and stir it up and cook it for 3 hours. The specifications now are much more precise and exact. Definitely when you're talking about, for example, in polyolefins and catalyst-based processes, it gets pretty sensitive. Is there sensitive intellectual property in your OT systems? Another question to think about. Is your process, the very process itself, highly sensitive? And Tori and I were talking about this before the session started, and I was sharing with him that when I first moved to the US from Canada back in '93, and I moved to Midland, Michigan to work at Dow in my first global job. And this was before my US citizenship was confirmed. There were operations on the Midland site that I was not allowed into because I wasn't a US national. And once I got my citizenship confirmed, that problem went away. But they asked the question, are you a US national? And if you aren't, you can't come on site. And it was because of the nature of the process. So examples of that: control strategies, proprietary process information. I mentioned catalyst chemistry, for example. Sources of competitive advantage at the operations level. The next question, the fourth question, is would your operations capability be compromised by higher level compromises? And this is where we start to touch on the supply chain. For example, if the ability to ship a product disappears because systems are immobilized, then it doesn't make sense. Most companies now, process plants that is, don't have a lot of on-site storage, and so it's make it, ship it. Well, if you can't ship it, then pretty soon you're not going to be able to make it because you got no place to put it, or you can't get raw materials in. I went through an experience like that back in the, well, I'll just say many years ago, and our ability to get stuff in and out was compromised by a little thing called a strike. And we were isolated behind a picket line for 7 months. So getting things through the picket line became a very important consideration. I could tell you stories about that, but I won't take the time. But you can see here raw material availability, product specifications, and so forth.